Hi everyone, this is a special episode of Fractured because it will not be led by me or Rashid. It is an episode where we invited several journalists from around Europe to discuss very important topics related to housing and migration and tourism and how this impacts our cities. So, this first session, organized with a project called Display Europe, took place in Athens, and this is the outcome of the conversation. You will hear three parts. Two of them are also visual. The last one is only an audio. Enjoy the conversation.
What degree do you think the media has failed in this job when it comes to reporting on migration and refugees?
I think the media has at some point failed on its role in reporting on the issue of migration, especially on refugee issues. One, I think it's the lack of interest.
Lack of interest from the media side?
Yeah, about the topic.
Because they report on it constantly.
Yeah, they report on it constantly. When I say lack of the interest is there is more interest in it when it sounds breaking news.
Mm-hmm.
If it doesn't sound breaking news, the interest is less.
Hi, I'm Tina Lee from Hostwriter and Unbiased the News, and I'm here in Athens at Refocus Studios, where we're talking to journalists from around the continent about pressing issues affecting cities, in particular the issues of housing and insecurity around housing, immigration, and tourism. So before we get started on our first topic, where we're going to dive into the issue of migration and how journalism can affect narratives around migration and housing and tourism, let's introduce the panel.
Hi, my name is Nyima, JADAMA. I live in Berlin, originally from Gambia. I'm happy to be part of the panel.
Hello, my name is Mohammed. I'm from Tajikistan, living in Poland in exile, and editor-in-chief of Asdate, which is also media based in exile.
Hi, I'm Hanna, originally from Poland. I live in Spain. I'm a freelance photojournalist and also happy to be here.
Great. And as I mentioned, I'm Tina Lee. I'm originally from the United States, but I live in Germany. So it just made me realize that all three of us are actually, four of us are immigrants.
Yeah, exactly.
So what more do you want from this panel? And we're all journalists. So let's get started talking a little bit about the role of journalism when it comes to reporting on migration, because we're a couple days out from the election of Donald Trump in the United States, who came to power once again using very inflammatory rhetoric about immigrants, how they destroy the economy, steal houses, eat cats and dogs. But that's across the ocean. Here in Europe, we've seen the same kind of rhetoric being used from the Netherlands, where a far-right party came in based on housing insecurity and blaming immigrants, to Poland, where we saw for many years anti-refugee rhetoric. It's more or less become a universal thing in Europe. And the question is whether journalism has been doing a good job of covering this phenomenon and reporting on it responsibly to the public. So the first question I have for you guys is, how do we think that the political decisions that are made actually influence the refugee discourse and the way that journalism reports on discourse? Is it a wag the dog scenario where the political decisions influence the reporting, or does the reporting influence the decisions in elections?
I think it's based on country. First, it depends on where the discussion is taking place, how wide the issue on migration discourse is, particularly I would say on asylum issues, because migration is like really general, but then you have like subtopics on refugees, asylum, statelessness, and so on and so on. And I think politicians actually have a great role to play. Policies actually influence these discussions a lot, negatively, however positively as well. Again, also depending on the country and the level of migrants or asylum seekers. I live in Germany, so maybe I will be giving more references to about the situation in Germany. So the last election, for example, the far right wing party AfD uses like migration issues, just like you mentioned, the past election that happened in America, where Donald Trump is using migrants as they eat dogs and cats. So it was somehow more or less the same that the far AfD people were using in Germany to say, we want a new Germany, we want to maintain our culture, we don't want, for example, Muslims, we don't want our cultures to be mixed and so on. We don't want to have asylum tourists, for example. We want to preserve our culture and so on. And I think this influences us a lot. Fortunately, they didn't win the election, but they're like this, almost there. And that's like brought a whole lot of scaring point, and who knows what will happen in the next election. It could be the same that happens in the US. So they affected this because they had a huge impact both at the parliament, at several local elections. They had a huge amount, and we've seen a whole lot of changes in the German asylum system because of the policies that influences it.
I mean, it's interesting because the fact that Muslims have been in Germany since before Germany was a state would suggest to you that perhaps Muslims are not some separate thing. But is there a similar kind of rhetoric going on in Poland, or is it a different kind of thing? And is journalism doing a good job of reporting accurately on the topic in Poland?
Well, in Poland, the topic of the migrants is very present, and what is scary is that now we have a changement in the government. We had a far-right government, now it's a centrist government, or rather, and they use exactly the same narrative. When it comes to some kind of migrants, we also have to speak about these double standards, because there is totally different narrative when we speak in Poland about migrants or refugees from Ukraine, and there's totally different narrative when we speak about migrants and refugees from Middle East countries or from African countries. And I mean, I was kind of prepared for this, but the narrative that Donald Tusk government is using right now is really extreme right narrative, and nobody cares, nobody pays attention. And what is scaring also, that there is no criticism towards this from the European Union, because we now have a pro-European government. So okay, they have the exactly the same narrative, exactly the same rejection towards some kind of refugees, but we will let them go because they are pro-European. So there's no criticism. It's not only far-right subject. It's not only far-right topic. No, so it's like this is like with spreading the using of the migration as a tool in the political debate. It's really going now much farther than the division between right and the left.
Do you agree?
From getting to this topic from my perspective and my personal experience, to be honest, I had when the election is happening, because during the campaign and after the campaign, personally as a refugee, I feel a lot of, I feel insecure. I feel insecure because I heard and I receive and I see a lot of misinformation against refugees, and it gives such a impact that all problems existed in Poland, it is because of us. If there is no refugees, there is no problems at all.
Which we know to be true, right? Yeah, looking at Poland's history.
That's exactly what I'm trying to explain, that usually the politician and even the journalists, they are not correcting this politician when giving them a tribune on the TV, on the media, when they create a false narrative about problems. The people believe and the people buy these problems. For example, now we are facing inflation in Poland, 30% inflation. The energy price goes up and many other crises, for example. But this is none of this problem related to immigrants or refugees. These problems have a totally different background and different. The housing problem were there even 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So I think the politicians just want to win the election. And instead of directing the cause problem, they're just creating false narrative to win the election. And as Hannah mentioned it, now Donald Tusk is planning to adopt new law and to ban. So which Poland will not be accepting any refugee application for 5 years. So that this is the conversation discourse now in Poland.
Well, so you mentioned that politicians are using these rhetorics to get elected, and that the EU doesn't do anything because he's pro EU. They think maybe less Eurosceptic perhaps than PIS was, less antagonistic. Okay, fine. That's what the politician's role is, right? They say what they have to say to get elected. They make policy promises to try to appeal to the public. But we're the media, and we have a different role to play. So where does our role as media, where we're meant to be watchdogs of the media, of the government on the one hand, but also where we're supposed to correct misinformation, complicate simplistic narratives being pushed, to what degree do you think this is happening, and to what degree do you think the media has failed in this job when it comes to reporting on migration and refugees?
I mean, I think the media has at some point failed on its role in reporting on the issue of migration, especially on refugee issues. One, I think it's the lack of interest.
Lack of interest from the media side?
Yeah, about the topic.
Because they report on it constantly.
Yeah, they report on it constantly. I mean, when I say lack of the interest is there is more interest in it when it sounds breaking news.
Mm-hmm.
If it doesn't sound breaking news, the interest is less. Now, for example, of course, Trump is making a whole lot of brouhaha around this, and it's interest, right? And that serves their interest, and it will get them whatever financial gain through clicks and whatever, people buying the newspapers and so on. Of course, they would report this. And also, for example, I felt like the media is also, because that actually portraying the negative side of the topic, migration and migrants and refugees and asylum seekers. So here is a huge interest in it, and this is why they're really, really reporting on it. And now in the other way around, if, for example, if it's a rape case or burglary or terror attack done by an immigrant person or someone with an immigrant background, they will say, well, it's an immigrant. But let's say the person is purely German or American, or he is a bit mentally ill.
Mm.
So you see the difference. And for example, portraying about success stories, there are so many good immigrants, there are so many asylum seekers and refugees and Muslims. These people are not thrown out because, they're just any ordinary person, right? So this is where the conflict of interest comes in. And then if you talk to them and they're like, well, in journalism, he who first breaks the news got on top. Right? You got a whole lot of click, a whole lot of interest, people are following you and so on. And I think we now live in a generation where the society some people does not really care about how the media is breaking the news. For them, when they talk, maybe they think, okay, it's ethical, they know their job, they're journalists, they know what they're doing. And this is where citizen journalism comes in. They don't really see that, or maybe even know that it's interest, it's tactics or whatever. So I think we could do better in terms of critically analyzing, fact-checking those topics that are coming out. For example, like I think it's bad language to say they eat dogs and cats. Like not every immigrant even eat meat, for example. So things like this.
To say the least, yeah.
Yeah, and the AfD in Germany are planning, for example, to even deport immigrants with German citizens. I mean, those that are born in Germany.
You're not hearing a lot about that from the press either.
Exactly.
In terms of the election coverage, for instance, this is some place where journalists often take their job very seriously for fact-checking. It's a place where if people make policy proposals, if politicians are making promises or saying, this is what I have achieved, that particularly the professional media class where they feel like at that moment a lot of people are paying attention to what they have to say, they usually take it rather seriously. Do they do the same thing when people make arguments about how immigrants or refugees are contributing to housing problems or contributing to crime or are, in other ways, hurting the culture of the country? Do they take their job as seriously about that topic?
I think that it depends on news outlets, and it depends on journalists. But one thing is what you're mentioning, to take our job seriously and fact checking, and another thing also is that why not start to develop new narratives and show other things? I mean, why we have to go from election to election to speak, or from crisis to crisis, so-called crisis many times, to speak about migrants? Why we don't speak about positive stories, integration stories, to show a different image of immigrants? This is something where the media is really not doing their job, because many news outlets, they don't want to buy this kind of story. They don't want to cover this kind of story. It's like if there is no suffer, there's no problem, there's no sensation, they don't go for it.
They want
And
tragedy porn.
They want like tragedy. Then they are telling us sometimes as freelancers, oh, we would like to have positive story. And when we bring positive story on the table,
not
they don't
interested.
take
boring.
it. Yeah.
And for example, one thing could be termed as positive is, for example, policymakers and politicians are actually using, when it comes, for example, elections are approaching, to actually get political points, right? And this is election time. It's either they speak good or bad about immigrants to actually score some political points. And I think one role a journalist could play in this case is to look this target group that they are talking about. Are they even allowed to vote? Most 90% of immigrants are not allowed to vote because they don't hold citizenship. And for example, like I don't know how it's called, like Kommunalwahl, like local elections, right? In Germany, they will conduct like just to do a survey to make sure that refugees at least and asylum seekers are voting. It's not official, but at least to say, okay, here is a number that could have somehow add value to the election if they were allowed to vote. Now, as a journalist, I think this is a point that we should critically look at and say, okay, they are actually using this target group to gain political points or to make an opponent lose a political point. They are making decisions on their behalf without them, and they're not even allowed to vote. Why are they not allowed to vote? What's the solution? There comes solution journalism.
Well, it comes back to what you were mentioning. I'd like to revisit what you said before, because we're talking about what they don't do. They haven't been using positive stories. They're not interested in actually showing the value that immigrants bring to communities, stories that also complicate these simplistic narratives. But what you said before, that it made you feel unsafe. And the fact that the amplification of stereotypes, that where someone is led to believe by reading the media, all of my problems are on the back of immigrants, everything wrong in this country has to do with them, it does make immigrants unsafe. We have also seen that there have been attacks directly on immigrants or people that people take to be immigrants, but also on immigrant shelters and places like this. So the media, on the one hand, we wish they could make more complicated narratives, but are they actually breaking the law in some way or breaking their own code of ethics when they report fake news that endangers members of the public?
Still, in this case, we have to look into particular media or reports. I remember in the TVP during the piece, they mentioned they did an interview about the woman and with 2 children from Tajikistan. She escaped it, and they said they published the narrative of the government of Tajikistan that she's a wife of the terrorist and her husband is imprisoned in Tajikistan because of terrorist activity. So it was a false misinformation, and usually the refugees have no information, or they don't have a lawyer to bring this case to the court. And in Poland, media are we have when state media, when whoever running the country, so this media just pro the current government. Like if this is peace, they are pro peace. If this is new government, they are just backing, supporting current government. And also we have a left media and right media or middle media, which also they are dependent on the politician, because this is all connected. The media, businessmen or business fair, and the politician, they are like a chain. They are related to each other. So that's why it is difficult for journalists, even though if the journalists want to change narrative, they might be not able, because the journalist by himself or herself not running the project or program. So there is, entire team deciding.
They're just one person in the chain.
One person. So that's why and creating new media. I don't know. It's very expensive and huge amount of work. But right now, I don't know about Poland, but the social media is kind of changing a little bit. So they are taking part of the audience, like YouTube bloggers and others. But really, I'm not familiar how it works in Poland. So the mainstream media is kind of, they are politicized. They are usually support one of the political parties in Poland. That's how I see the media in Poland.
I would add also that there's like what you mentioned, the chain situation, the chain relation. No, so we as journalists, we have our responsibility on how we work, but also I think we have to speak about the public. They also can help in changing narratives. I mean, there are some smaller media maybe, or like digital, especially digital media, that try to work in a different direction, that try to change this narrative, and it's the public responsibility to like back up those kind of new narratives also. I mean, we can try to do our work, but we need to have a support for this also, especially when it comes to the new outlets and stuff like this, no?
Yeah.
So I also like kind of ask the public to be more engaged.
I mean, one of the common threads between what you mentioned and what you were talking about before is that, immigrants are kind of a good punching bag because of the fact that people think, oh, they can't vote. Politicians apparently don't think they need to win over immigrants. And what you mentioned also is that they don't believe that immigrants will sue them, right? That there's a feeling that you wouldn't be able to hire a lawyer for defamation when someone made a blatantly false accusation against you, which of course they would do if you're someone higher up in society, I guess, or had more access to things. And on top of that, there's a belief, whether that's true or not, that the public is not so interested in the plight of immigrants. Do we also need to reframe who we think of as the public? Because increasingly in these societies, immigrants are the public. What is the media trying to do to address immigrants not just as a topic or subject matter, but as actually an audience?
In reference to that, I just want to give an example. That happened in Belgium, actually for the first time. Not black, but a POC, people of color, is a woman, won a case against a parliamentarian. And the court ruled out that the parliamentarian was stripped out of his position, and the lady was compensated like 1 million euros.
Wow, for what?
Well, she asked for €1. The total amount is still yet to be decided. But the case was between 2018 to March 2014. So that was history. And the media prayed, it's actually digital racism, right? So she was invited in Berlin because I had moderated a keynote session that she gave on online racism.
Yes,
You must have
about this.
Exactly. So for the first time, as a woman of color, that happened. And media plays a huge role in, I would say, trying to tarnish her career, her image, and all of that, because she was dealing with a very, very powerful person in Belgium. And this person is not just powerful in Belgium, but in certain countries in Europe, because they
was a right-wing leader,
young
young right-wing college leader who's risen through the ranks.
Exactly, Van and Sild, something, they're very powerful in Hungary as well.
College team, basically.
Exactly. And
frat boy Nazis, they're real fun.
Exactly. Right. So, and the investigation revealed that it was not the first person that it happened to. It actually happened to several people, including 2 other black women who actually restrained that they can't even take the case to court because they won't win it and nothing would come out of it. And this lady was brutally harassed. She has to be hiding. What helps her was during Corona time because she was wearing masks. There was a whole lot of media coverage about her. But then for me, it was like all of those media coverage, 80% was negative because she's not Belgian, right? So they could have actually done it better. But when she won the case, compared to the media coverage, when the case was going on, before the court ruled out, was totally different. It's like nothing is really happening. And it was when she took it up on herself to start her own podcast and start speaking about this across Europe. And this is how she landed in Berlin. And now this is where you see that, okay, what was the role media was playing? And she was even working as a social media coordinator on one of the media houses in Belgium. So you could see how biased the media could be because maybe the person is not a native of that country, even though you are born in that country, but you are not, you have a migration background. So I think media could really play a huge role when it comes to this. You said we need the support of the citizen. Of course, there are some people that have zero idea about what happens in the outside world. They only listen to what the media is portraying.
Yeah, but I mean, rather than ask for the public to be more sympathetic or something, what if we said, immigrants are the public, actually? And not only should immigrants be part of the public, they should also be part of the media. All of us seem to believe that.
No, I'm sorry, I was not asking the public to be more sympathetic. I was asking the public to be more engaged and support the media that are doing like a fact-checked and in-depth investigation and things like this. There's a difference. But I agree that the migrants should be we should start to portray ourselves. I'm a migrant also, all of us here, from subject to the active agent and the target public also. Yeah, the problem is that what we started to speak about. It's very much related to the right of vote. Until this does not change, I don't know to what extent in each country we will really have like a place in a public sphere, in a public conversation, because somehow we are like a second category of citizens. And it has, in the long term, it has an impact.
I mean, but there's maybe also a lesson that we could take from the right wing there, because what happened with the right, I mean, now they're the center of all discourse and everything revolves around them like they're the sun in our universe, which isn't great. But prior to that, they were really excluded from media platforms, and they went and made their own, and they built up a really big following. Is something like that the answer, not just for us as immigrant journalists, but also as members of diaspora who maybe also don't want to just talk about immigration stories, but want to talk about all kinds of different stories?
But there exist some media that are run by, in Spain, I don't remember now the name, I'm sorry. But there's one in Spain, digital, that is founded by Syrians refugees, I think, and who are also journalists. So there are already initiatives like this. It's just that we should give them more advertisement so they can be better known.
Support.
I don't think advertisement is needed. What I believe in, create your own, and if it's good, they will come for you. I have my own platform. It's for immigrants, refugees, and the diaspora community, and people are responding, and I think you have that because the space is not there. It's not diverse as we think it is. So you have to create your own and not wait for them.
Do you agree? We have to make our own space?
I believe if creating our own media, it's kind of, I don't know. I believe that if we should use from the existing media, we should be invited to existing media, because we run a media, but it is exile media. We report on our country, not about Poland. But for Poland, I think it's more better to be invited and to be part of the existing media and to feel part of the society. But then if you create your own, you're going to be like a, you're going to just circle around yourself.
No. It depends on your content. It actually depends on your content, or maybe it depends on the country. Because if the space is not there, they wouldn't come for you. If you don't create it, you create it, you don't create it, maybe they wouldn't come for you. So create your own. If it's good, they will come for you. I am not saying create it and just be secular on your own. Be collaborative.
Maybe the answer is that we need to be doing all these things. We need to be creating our own, trying to take over in those traditional media houses and make spaces for ourselves. Basically, demand and take space wherever we possibly can.
It has to be parallel.
Yeah,
exactly.
Not one strategy, right? But to have the public, for people to recognize that migrants are not a topic, but are members of the public. Soon, many will become voters, members of the media, but also make their own media ecosystems and talk about many other things other than immigration. thank you all for this really interesting conversation. And we'll be back with some more very soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Kalispera.
Kalispera.
I'm Tina Lee from Unbiased the News and Hostwriter, and we're here in Refocus Studios talking about cities under pressure. One of the topics that we wanted to talk about today was tourism. So I have some guests with me that will be discussing tourism in their cities. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Yes, I'm Esperanza Escribano. I'm a freelance journalist and I'm based in Barcelona. So I have been affected by tourism since I moved there, and I've been writing and investigating about the bad consequences of it since 2013, so 10 years already.
And I'm Alessia Melchiorre. I'm also a freelance journalist, and I'm co-founder of Marea Media, which is a no-profit media organization based in Naples, which is a city that is also facing serious issues due to over-tourism right now.
So let's start with this. What's the status quo? And I think both of these cities are well-known tourist destinations since decades. Where are we at now in 2024? Start with Barcelona?
Well, yes, I think every time I have visited cities like Venice, I was like seeing the future of what Barcelona may be facing. And I think we're already there, that the city after the pandemic, it's becoming a sort of a theme park. But the good part is because it would be good to focus also on the solutions and the good parts of it. That there are these all these grassroots movements that try to fight the bad consequences of tourism. And that has got to a point where the mayor has decided to forbid all touristic apartments in the city by 2029. It's not sure that he's going to be able to make it, but because there are a lot of legal issues around, but that would at least prevent more investment funds and big landlords to buy out flats and convert them into touristic apartments, because there are already 10,000 touristic apartments in Barcelona legally. And that means there are at least another 20,000 that are not legal. So that provokes a lot of problems when it comes to housing, like people having to leave the city, people having to share a flat in their 40s. So at least we're at a point where things could be going to a better situation sometime soon.
What about in Naples? Are things improving? What's the situation like there on the ground?
Naples is facing this new high season of tourism as of the last couple of years, I would say. But in the last year, data from Inside Airbnb, which is this monitor platform on the Airbnb listings, says that there has been 10K new listings in the city. And this is a number that matches very well with the number of evictions that has been currently going on in the city, which is, again, 10K. So there is a huge housing crisis right now, and people that have been living in the historical parts of the city center they have to leave their houses to give space to short-term rentals, B&Bs, and to serve the purpose of touristic needs, basically. And of course, this is a huge problem. And in Naples as well, there is a new kind of movement of, let's say, people and citizens and locals that are getting organized and try to come up with solutions and proposals to the local city administration. There is this citizen assembly called SET, and they launched this year a campaign called Resta Abitante, which means stay local, or stay resident. Yeah. And it is basically about this, so to push the local administration to come come up with solution to limit the power of Airbnb and similars, let's say. So yeah, the city hall so far hasn't done much, except for one thing, which is, I think, quite good, let's say, solution, or at least first step of action. That is the Urban Tourism Observatory. And it is actually a tool which is promoted by the City Hall of Naples and the University of Naples, where they are collecting data on the numbers of tourists coming to the city and providing this data to the media and, of course, also to other local group activists like SET, and also providing information to the local administration on how to, change the policies to help citizens, live the city the way it is.
I mean, we're starting at a place where there's some assumptions about what people already know. If you don't live in a place that has a lot of tourists, it might not be immediately evident to you why this is a bad thing. Let me play devil's advocate here for some of the topics.
Cool.
Don't you want to have lots of visitors to your city coming and spending a lot of money, first of all? And second of all, Airbnb says that they provide locals with a way to earn extra income. Lots of people have an extra room in their house. They could use that when they go out of town for the weekend or just to bring somebody in. Isn't this a wonderful way to make extra income for people so that the tourism economy is not just for private industry, but also for individuals? Give some context to our listeners. What's the problem with these vacation rentals, and what's the problem with tourism more generally? Doesn't it bring a lot of money?
So in the case of Barcelona, I mean, it's good to have tourists visiting your city and to give this image of this modern city to the world. The problem is that we get almost 30 million people a year visiting a city of 3 million people. So
Wow.
There is literally no space for everyone. So, for example, I live in one of the neighborhoods that is in the city center, and I have to face these massive groups of 50 people, 50 tourists visiting the neighborhood, because that's where the little mountain of Barcelona is, when I'm trying to get to the nursery to leave my boy there. So sometimes, I mean, it really comes to be in the middle of it's disrupting my daily life. But also, for example, there is this bars and restaurants where we used to go and where we could have, a drink after work, let's say at 6 or 7 p.m. Because normally people in Spain won't have dinner until after 8 at least, but 9 p.m. should be the time to have dinner. So you normally go for a drink at 6 or 7. And now, every time you try to have a drink with your friends after work, people from the restaurant would say, no, the tables are only for dinner now at 6 p.m. So who is going there? Tourists. So there is a lot of things we can't do because they are now preferring to have tourists that spend way much money than locals can do. And also in the terms of Airbnb, would help you with your income. That makes me really laugh, because the problem in Barcelona that we are facing a lot is that there are a lot of buildings owned by the same landlord, and they used to rent all the flats for families who were living in the city, so long-term rentals. And at this point, they sell out these buildings to big investment funds that would evict everyone in the building, or at least put an end to their contracts. Then they were refurbished and changed sometimes just details of the flats, and then put them on Airbnb, and then they would make 200 euros per night, while they were doing 700 euros per month renting it out to a family. So they make much more money. And when we were before checking this inside Airbnb website, we were, well, let's have a look at Barcelona. And just one landlord was renting out 428 flats.
Wow.
In Barcelona. So I can't believe this is a family that is making a bit more income of that spare room now that their son is living in another city. No, it's not like that. It's like what we come to see is a lot of big companies and big landlords making money out of places where people were living before. So we see all that coming to just a few hands.
So is that also the case in Naples? Or, I mean, if I'm not mistaken, Naples was one of the more impoverished places in Italy up into not that distant past. So now there's all this money coming in.
Exactly. I mean, the city of Naples already was facing big issues with poverty and infrastructure problems, and that hasn't changed at all after the arrivals of huge amount of tourists. Actually, the problems have become even worse because the income coming from Airbnb is not being equally distributed among citizens of Naples. And actually, tourists are using the same infrastructure that also and same services that also local citizens have to use, and that has not been, dealt by the local administration. So that is actually an additional problem, not a solution to what Naples was already going through.
So more stress even on the infrastructure than there was before.
Yeah, exactly. And what I wanted to say as well is that Naples has always been a city that had a specific image in people's minds, in the media as well. And now I think this image is becoming even more stereotypical, or at least exoticized. Like there is a sense of exoticism in the way people see Naples and the people of Naples. And that has been fueled as well by tourist influencers on social media that, give you the videos of these streets in Naples where you can eat the best pizza, and that is changing as well the economy in a way that you can only see food places, restaurant, pizza places, and all the other local shops, which were also focused on manufacturing. Naples had a big tradition of shoe manufacturing and other types of arts manufacturing are completely being dissolved by the mass tourism wave. So everything is is changing towards to serve the needs of tourists, and tourists want to eat pizza and, see the mandolino and this kind of very stereotypical images.
I mean, it sounds like a little bit of an echo of what you mentioned before about how it's turning into a theme park. It sounds like the complaints to some degree are that these places that were very original are becoming these sort of distorted versions of themselves, where instead of having the original diversity, they take a couple of features that are geared towards tourists, and then everything kind of comes homogenously repetitive about that. And I can see how that would frustrate you, particularly when, as you mentioned, it tends to exacerbate inequality. But in the previous conversation that we were just having, we were talking about migration. And one of the complaints, of course, of the majority society is that immigrants come in and they change everything. They don't follow our traditions. They're different than us. Some parts of town are unrecognizable. What's the difference or the distinction between the sort of complaints that you guys say are legitimate about tourism and how it distorts a city, its culture, and makes lives for the residents worse, and the migration complaints, which I think we also agree are sometimes based in prejudice and stereotypes and don't realistically reflect the problems? And also, is there something in between? Because I don't know about Naples and Barcelona, but I know that a lot of the cities that face this big tourism eventually also have large groups of people that decide to come and live there as digital nomads. Maybe they also buy some of the nicer flats for themselves. So what's the distinction between tourism and migration? And also those people that are kind of both, a tourist who becomes an immigrant, in other words.
Well, in Barcelona, there is this banner that became famous, and now you could see over every balcony that wants to protest against the bad effects of mass tourism. That is, tourists go home, refugees welcome.
Uh-huh.
and you see that in a lot of demonstration, like people shouting and this saying. Because I think that the bad consequences of all of this is how gentrification is changing our neighborhoods, that is making us having to leave the city and making all much more expensive than it was, while when migrants come, they at least get to integrate into the society, or at least that's the experience I have had in my neighborhood, in my area, which is Raval, and it has and the tax of immigration there is 40%, and we get to know each other, and I don't know how to explain it, but the integration is possible because they end up coming to the restaurants where locals were going, and we end up going to the restaurants that these migrant communities open up in the neighborhood. While the problem with tourism is that you face two kinds of business. One is the super expensive restaurants where they sell you this special Catalan cuisine where you end up paying, I don't know, 100 euros for a dinner that no average person in Barcelona could afford. Or this not so cheap but affordable food that no one that knows the food in Barcelona would like to eat, like all these, I don't know, hot dogs and stuff like this doesn't have anything to do with what we eat. I mean, they try to still use something as local food and it's not, or these frozen paellas you could eat at La Rambla. So please, if you come to Barcelona, never end up sitting at a restaurant in Las Ramblas. I mean, there's no way you're going to find good food over there.
Now you're giving us tourist tips, huh? Trying to decrease tourism by giving
at least
list your top 5 restaurants now. No, okay, but what about in Naples? What's the distinction? I mean, is there a big wave of immigration to Naples? I know Italy generally has a lot of immigrants and refugees. Is it also true in Naples? And how is it different with tourists versus immigrants?
I mean, I think the phenomenon is pretty similar to Barcelona. There are entire neighborhoods which are being gentrified and which are changing their face towards, tourism as well. But there are other areas which are still very popular. I mean, not popular as in famous, but popular as in lived by people. And there are so many different type of people living together and mixed together that it's kind of like the city is segregating itself in a way. So you know that in that area it's safe because, there is the tourist, and you know that other area is a little bit more, less visited because it's a little bit in the outskirts or etc. But I think it's something that you can see also here in Athens. I mean, you can see neighborhoods which are totally gentrified and where you could only hear people speaking other languages other than Greek, basically, and other areas of the city where you still can find locals and as well immigrants living together. So I think, the Airbnb revolution is basically having its effect in the same effects in every city. And what happened in Venice, in Milano, in Roma is happening in Naples right now as well. So
It's expanding. It's going,
it's
farther
going
and-
south, but that's the problem, I think.
Well,
because
that's what's interesting, right? It's that not like this is like a local phenomenon. Airbnb is a company that was started in Silicon Valley, and it's come to all these cities and actually probably used more in some of these places than even is in the United States, it seems like.
Yeah, that it's like this. And I think if you try to gather with your neighbors and start fighting this and trying to tackle the problem and make your government accountable, you pass this phase of turismophobia that you start hating all the tourists you cross paths with, but then you go to cities like Athens and become the same. I realized that when all I could see it was these cheap souvenirs surrounding me, and it was like, fuck, I'm in the tourist
doing
area.
it.
I'm doing it. I'm not,
Well, that's the thing, right? I mean, to some degree, I think that everyone believes somehow that travel also makes you a better person, that going to other countries, meeting other kinds of people can expand your borders and help your horizons to change. And particularly when we face this really large wave of right-wing xenophobia, that you think like some of these people need to get out of their city and go travel and realize, at the same time, it is done in this damaging way. But if I pick up what you guys are putting down, so to say, it seems like you're suggesting that tourism actually decreases diversity, whereas immigration tends to increase it.
I think it depends on which kind of tourism, because there are also forms of tourism which are sustainable and that preserve the community out of the damage that Airbnb can do. So slow tourism exists, and I think we can take some inspiration from it.
What is slow tourism?
I think slow tourism is a form of tourism where the tourist doesn't come to the place for 1 or 2 days. It's in the first restaurant that finds on the street and leaves, just to take some pictures and go, But stays, comes to the place, talks to the local people, doesn't leave the garbage on the street, respects the community that is visiting, and tries to learn the history and culture of the place that is visiting.
I'm doing that in Germany. I'm doing really slow tourism. It's been 13 years. But it brings up another point I wanted to mention, which is that, you said this like Tory phobia kind of. Mm-hmm. I've seen it in Berlin as well. I live there now, but if you hear me speaking English on the streets, there's not much to make you not realize that I'm a tourist. And I've had things before where people screamed at me and said, like, fucking Americans speaking English. In this case, I usually turn around and say, ja, ich kann auch auf Deutsch reden, Arschloch, aber ich will das nicht. I can also speak German with you if you want, but at the moment, I'm speaking English. Is that really a problem? And then usually they're like, But the point is that it can turn kind of xenophobic. I see that in Berlin to some degree, that it almost has the kind of sound of Ausländer raus, foreigners out. And how do you especially grapple with this phenomenon, and especially we're journalists here? We're in a phenomenon where, on the one hand, we're fighting against the homogenization, the financial effects, the rising inequality, and the environmental factors that come along with mass tourism. On the other hand, that story is much less interesting to a lot of people than the story about, yeah, you're right, let's stop all the foreigners, every last one of them, not just the tourists, everybody. Or, on the other hand, they actually want the tourists, but not the immigrants, right? So how do we explain these stories to our audiences in a way that doesn't increase xenophobia and lead to a scenario in which they go all the way? Yeah, the whole problem is foreigners.
Yeah, I think a lot of things have to change, because it has happened to me as well, that going back home with my luggage from the airport and having people in the neighborhood looking at me like, fucking tourists. tourists, and I'm like, well, I live here. just having my suitcase with me.
Not even
doesn't-
travel is bad,
Yeah,
right?
It's like, well, I'm just traveling back. But I think it's a bigger debate about how we sell the city, so to speak, to tourism. So, for example, Barcelona became one of the biggest starting point for cruise ships. And that kind of tourism damages the cities because then all the cruisers take this bus right to the city center. 100 people get off the bus and then take the touristic bus to visit the hot spots of the city, and they end up going back to the boat without speaking to anyone in the city, without spending a single euro in the local shops. So I think cities should make an effort to change the way they attract tourists and how they want to be in the touristic market and what kind of people they want to attract. Because if you put more effort on, let's say, this is a city where you can spend a week, where you can go to the museums, but then there are these local communities you can visit. I mean, yeah, public institutions should make an effort and trying to swift the discourse and the kind of city they're selling, because Barcelona has been portrayed for a lot of time, for decades, as a beach, sun, and alcohol destination. So, and now we come
And
to a point,
architecture.
and a bit of architecture, but just for a few hours, and then go back to beers and party. So. Yeah, that there should be an effort there.
And as a closing remark, do you also have a policy idea or something how you can, I mean, you said spread it out a little bit more, stop attracting maybe the kind of minute tourists, the quick ones. You already talked about slow tourism. Do you have other ideas or any closing ideas of how we could convince our cities to be better in this?
Listen to the people, I guess. I mean, with Marea Media, the project I am part of, the main mission is to change the narratives on southern Italy, especially because southern Italy faced for a long time a different, or at least a negative discourse, most of the time on mainstream media. So, and Naples is part of southern, actually is kind of the capital city of southern Italy for for some time. And so how to change the narratives, how to shift the narratives is part of our main mission. And we have been talking a lot about this. And of course, listen to the people is always the first advice that comes to our minds, especially when we are dealing with such complex issues. So yeah, I would recommend local administrators to be more respectful, for sure, of the local residents first.
I mean, maybe it sounds like what you guys are both recommending is be more like immigrants, less like tourists, right?
Yes, kind of.
Hang out with the locals, go to local things, read local media.
And don't be afraid to go inside a local place, because sometimes it's easier to go to the touristic place and go to these mainstream restaurants like, I don't know, McDonald's or Starbucks. Yes, just be a bit more curious.
So somewhere
people
between
are going to welcome
foreigners and natives is locals.
Locals.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Act like a local.
Act like a local.
Well, thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we
Paristo.
last time we said in multiple different languages, so I would say Dankeschön and thank you.
Gracias. It's more or less similar.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Kalispera.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tina Lee from Hostwriter and Unbiased the News, and we are continuing our conversations here in Athens at Refocus Studios about cities under pressure. So we've been talking about migration, tourism. Now we're going to delve into a topic that has become very hot all over Europe and way beyond, which is the question of housing. I'm joined by 4 journalists. Why don't you guys go ahead and introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Ula Idzikowska. I'm a freelance reporter based in Poland.
Hi, I'm Bernardo Alvarez, and I'm also a freelance reporter based in Madrid.
Hi, I'm Raluca Besliu. I'm an independent journalist. I'm originally from Romania, but I'm based in Belgium.
Hi, I'm Emma Pons. I'm a journalist based in Barcelona.
So we have been talking in the last sections of this conversation about how there is a lot of narratives in the media about immigration and tourism, and these things are coming a bit to a head in the topic of housing, because there is a very real problem with lack of housing in Europe, or at least the sense that housing has become more scarce and unaffordable, whether that's reflected in the number of houses or just in the number of houses that are available. What are some of the narratives that the media has been using to explain this, or amplifying that politicians use to explain this in your countries? And are they true? Who wants to start? How about in Belgium?
Let's talk about Romania.
Romania, sure.
Yes, I think in Romania, maybe it's not quite the same issues that concern some of the other countries. So, for instance, there's not quite as many migrants. Maybe one of the migrant groups that has been more amply discussed has been the Ukrainian refugees that have put some level of pressure on the housing market, but I wouldn't say there are other migrant groups or that many kind of international residents, so expats that are coming in Romania. Maybe one of the bigger problems right now is Airbnb in some of the main cities. So a lot of the central houses are being turned into Airbnbs, and that's putting some pressure on the market. And then I would also say that there are fewer houses that are being constructed in Romania. So year by year, we see a shortage in that sense. I think some of the other countries will have slightly dissimilar problems, though. I can come back to the far-right narrative, though, because it is exploiting the issue of housing. So we're having presidential elections very soon in December this year, and the far-right candidate has amply speculated the housing situation by introducing a plan to offer 1 million houses, a very realistic plan as it sounds, at a very low rate of 35,000 euros. And so people are really flocking up to sign up to this scheme / plan, as he calls it. So, yeah.
So a promise for free housing, but not blaming immigrants? That's maybe not so bad.
I mean, I think he's speculating the fact that a lot of young Romanians can't afford to move out of their parents' houses. So in Romania, the issue is a lot of people up till their 30s still live with their parents. It's very, like, rent is getting higher and higher. It's very hard to purchase affordable housing. And so for him, this has been, the promise of purchasing something for 30,000 euros, I think, is incredible for a lot of people.
It would sound good to me. What about in Barcelona? We heard in the previous conversation that this topic of Airbnb is very pregnant in Barcelona, but what is the explanation that the media offers for why housing is under pressure?
Yes, in Barcelona we have a lot of problems related to tourism, but especially like in housing, what the narrative is, and I think the colleague from Madrid will also tell it. In Spain, the media are focusing on squatters, and they say like the problem is that when you are out of your house, people can come and squat your house and you will lose it. So
wait, explain for our audience, what's a squatter in the context of Barcelona?
Okay, so a squatter is just a person that goes when you are not in your home. They can go inside, they change the lock, and they stay there. So this is not a very realistic explanation of the housing crisis because, of course, the laws protect the owner of the house. So it's not this the problem, but the media are exploiting this issue to say, like, okay, you like to just feed this fear to lose your house. So the focus is not on the real problem. That would be more tourism, Airbnb, and this lack of housing, and especially the high prices. So I think it's a very big problem to face, and we should change this narrative and get to the more deep causes of this problem.
I would like to add something when it comes to squatting, because there's like kind of revival of squatting in Amsterdam and in the Netherlands, because there's like huge shortage of housing. And then again, the real problem is not being addressed, but like migrants, especially refugees, which are really like a scarce amount of people who are coming to the Netherlands, because they are mostly like labor migrants who are needed because of the job shortages. But at the same time, there is not enough space to accommodate them, and they end up being crammed like in a places which are not very well maintained, let's say. And the real problem is not being addressed, but what's appearing in the media is this narration that people are coming while people from Amsterdam, Rotterdam have no place to live. The same is about foreign students, for example.
I mean, there were not that recently, but Netherlands has a very unique practice of taking like 18 months to form a government or whatever. But they had elections, and when they had those elections, a lot of people said that the reason that they voted for far-right ethno-nationalistic fascist weirdo Geert Wilders is because of the fact that they thought he would give them a house, and that he was the only one speaking about the immigration pressure on housing. So it's a success story for this narrative in the Netherlands to some degree. Is that right?
But the question is, whether there is pressure because of migration.
Well, whether it's true or not, it got somebody elected. I mean, are there similar kind of false narratives going around, or is it more complicated than that in Madrid?
In Madrid, it's more or less the similar that is happening in Barcelona with squatting and all this fake narrative about the maybe immigrants groups that they enter in empty houses or in your house, and they want to live without paying, and because of their fault, the prices are rising, and the normal working class, Spanish working class, can't afford to pay for their rent because of the squatters are breaking the market.
And people are buying this explanation. They think it's...
Yes, in fact, all these security companies are doing a lot of business with alarms and cameras and all these kind of technologies to protect your home against the squatters that are waiting that you leave home to enter in and squat it.
Wow. I hadn't heard about that. That's quite interesting. I mean, we have a squatting scene in Berlin too, and it's really heavily associated with like the left. So that you've kind of merged migrants and left-wing squatters into one scary group of home invaders.
It's different than the term of squatting. There's also like a classical political movement of squatting, of social centers and so on. But this is like other kind of squatting, just families or individuals that go into a home, sometimes to an empty home, just because they don't have where to live. It's not like this organized movement of squatting and political and so on. It's different.
Well, that brings up a interesting point, because traditionally when we talk about this housing issue, we're talking about people who do have a roof over their head, but maybe they would like to move to a bigger place, or they want to have a new place to live. But there's also the problem of homelessness in a lot of these cities, right? So to what degree does the media pay attention to the topic of homelessness in your experience, and your cities are also in other ones that you've looked at?
Well, it's not particularly a sexy topic,
Yeah, in Spain neither. There's almost no. They don't appear in media. Their voices and their faces and their stories have no space in at least in mainstream official narrative in the media.
It's I'm thinking about Hungary right now, right? Like where homelessness has been pretty much criminalized.
Yeah. That's one solution, right?
Yeah.
Just make it illegal.
Yeah. Take them out of the public sphere, make them invisible. So in some sense, that has been covered. And I think it's been covered from both sides, you know, so people who were, or media, journalists who are criticizing the fact that this has been criminalized. And I think, you know, yeah, they introduced a law where they really cannot be accepted in public spaces. They're removed immediately. And then there's the other side of the media that's saying, well, yeah, this is a great solution. Remove them, take them out.
The Donald Trump plan too, to put them into camps, and they said, oh, they'll have doctors and things in the camps, and you're like Dr. Mengele, or what kind of camps are we talking about here? Yeah. And what about in Barcelona?
In Barcelona, pretty much the same as in Madrid. There's also quite a lot of people living in the streets, but since they are there, but nobody looks at them, it's not a topic covered in the media. From just once in a year, there's the official count of how many people are there, and okay, that day it appears in the media, but the rest of the year it's not a covered topic.
Okay, I want to jump back 500 feet a little bit. So we're talking about basically who has rights to own houses, right? The companies would say there's nothing banning us from coming and buying up houses and using them to get more profits, because we make more profit from people that come and rent them than we do from locals. So what's so wrong about that? Is there a right to housing, and how far does that right go? Does it trump the right to private property or the right to dispose of your property the way that you wish?
But you know, nowadays, especially like young generation, nobody can afford to own a house because, you know, of the extremely high mortgages.
Well, we know somebody owns them. So whether it's young people or I do think that there are some young, wealthier people that do have, I saw during COVID, some of them crying online because they thought that their 25 Airbnbs would all of a sudden collapse. This collapse apparently didn't happen. So I was very curious about why it was the fact that so many people who, especially even young people who had invested in huge amounts of properties, managed to survive that without anything taking place. But it's still the question, there's a difference between the right to own a house and the right to have somewhere to live. Do we have that right now in modern societies, the right to have somewhere to live?
I mean, that's a complex question. I think it depends on the societies, right? So, like, if you look at Romania and sort of how that's evolved over time in a lot of the communist countries, you started with, the government essentially giving you a house, or very easily giving you a house that eventually you ended up owning. And nowadays, I think there's still kind of that sense of we still want to have a house. We kind of feel entitled to that house. But then, you know, when we switched to privatization, I think a lot of those houses ended up like going for sale. And I think there's a shift in culture where more people think, no, you have to afford your house and pay for your house, not get a house from the government.
I have a strong guess, and tell me if I'm right, that if I went to the countryside in Romania, I could buy a house, even with my salary. So is there a right to live in Bucharest or in Madrid or in Barcelona? Why don't people go to places where housing is affordable if there's this huge crush inside the cities?
What about jobs? You know, there is no public transport in most of the places, so you also have to own a car. And you know, if you want to have kids, and there's no infrastructure, because you know, like in Poland, there is this. Okay, there are a lot of investments, but sometimes like neighborhoods popped out in the middle of nowhere with no infrastructure, so you end up in cut off from any kind of services. So, yeah.
In that aspect, in Spain, it's like a very centralized country in just two cities, Madrid and Barcelona, where all the companies, all the working opportunities are there. So maybe you can do your life, you can work in what you have studied in another places outside Madrid and Barcelona. So everyone wants to go to Madrid and Barcelona.
Well, so then we're like kind of hitting at the edge of the problem a little bit, right? So, I mean, to some degree, the politicians have made a decision that they want to prioritize the ability for foreign investors and for the wealthy to own numerous vacation housings because it drives in tourism, which must make somebody some money. You also say that these are the places that have jobs in tourism and service, but also all kinds of jobs in companies and everything. So as journalists, what's the limit to what we can kind of advocate without crossing the line to becoming political activists ourselves? How can we explain this situation to people without basically being inherently critical of, I'm sorry to say it, capitalism?
I think it's important to explain the situation in detail. The situation we are in is very complex regarding to housing, but there are many actors that are involved, and it's very important to explain all the actors that are involved and why do they have an interest in this kind of real estate business. And especially Barcelona is a very attractive city, so I think you can just explain the situation without being an activist and letting people jump to their own conclusions, because it's like telling the situation how it is and saying, okay, big real estate companies from other countries are coming to our city and they are doing this. This is not like taking any side, it's just explaining the situation.
Do you think that readers are open to these kind of, I mean, we admit this is rather complex, seems also inherently to some degree critical of capitalism, critical of the government. And then you have the government saying like, no, I have a much easier solution. It's the immigrants, So where do we as journalists, to what level can we succeed in persuading people to take the time and attention to understand the complexity? What's the best route for this?
That is a problem that affects everybody, almost every family or everyone knows someone who has problems with housing. So I think it's a topic that everyone is interested in because it's really making a lot of damage in society, especially in young generations. So I think like with human stories, we were talking this morning, human stories might be a good way to make growth the interest on housing crisis and what is happening with the housing market.
So human stories that give kind of context and learn as you follow them about some of the different factors.
Yeah, human-centered stories plus data. So combining the more personable elements with some of the hard facts that go behind the housing situation. So that, and also we were talking about the fact that maybe having extremely complex one article is very difficult for readers to digest. So instead, maybe breaking it down into a series where you have multiple articles that look at different facets of the problem. So the political angle, consider also the migration angle, Airbnb, all of these different elements could be perhaps an easier way to kind of disseminate these ideas and think about them. Then again, the question is, will readers come back to the series, even if you present it as a series? And that's a more complex question. Who do you end up addressing in the end? Is it an echo chamber? Is it the same people that already know about the topic and care about the topic? How do you really reach to the kinds of people that maybe don't have time to read an article or don't care to read an article? And I think that's a much harder question to answer.
Well, I mean, this question of not having time is one thing, right? We're talking about, like, you're in a situation where you're economically vulnerable. The chances that you have a lot of free time that you want to spend on reading things is one thing. On the other hand, I think there's more the question of, like, emotional, that there is a level of real anger that people feel about this. Journalists, of course, are not immune from this because many of us are also in precarious financial situations where housing is also not readily available. So there is a level of anger in the public. And when people are angry, it makes it difficult for them to process information, complex information, in a calm way. To some degree, doesn't that explain a little bit why people seem susceptible to simplistic narratives where there's an easy person to blame? So how do we journalists meet people where we are, not where we might like them to be, where they would sit and patiently study the data and information? How can we kind of figure out ways to reach people in the emotional state of being really furious and really vulnerable?
I would say, invest in short videos, like explaining in 3 minutes what's the situation? I have no other solution for that.
I mean, you can imagine a really angry video. Who fucked our housing market? You know, where it's like they say it's the immigrants. No, stop listening to them. You're stupid. Actually, what's going on is this. It was BlackRock. God. I mean, we could really shout at people about these kinds of things. But again, there's always this thing. We're supposed to be neutral and in the middle. And if you take a side against the government, against capitalism, against real estate, to some degree, you're really putting yourself out there, taking a side. Is that what journalists need to do in this moment, is more overtly take sides?
But explaining phenomena, is it taking sides? There are facts.
Well, I mean, I tend to agree with this interpretation that you guys have, with that it has something to do with rising inequality and neoliberal investment things. But there's other side. There are people that explain that differently, and that would also say a rising tide raises all boats, that we're on the way to a wonderful neoliberal paradise if we could just get there, and that it's actually people like these leftists that keep putting, they keep messing things up. But if we would get rid of the regulations, housing crisis will go down. And it's difficult to argue with that because I would say because economics isn't a real science, but it's difficult to argue with that because we're journalists and we're not supposed to be like sort of arguing back and forth between economists, right? So, I mean, where is our standpoint where we can report on this neutrally and truthfully, or do we have to give one of those up?
I think it's very important to have the backing of experts and data, because this is the way that you can remain neutral and just explaining what experts are saying. Because, of course, there are experts that also do studies that defend real estate companies, so they are taking sides. But there are other experts that maybe do another kind of studies that, I mean, everybody's taking a side in this topic because it affects multiple rights and everything. But if you support the investigation on some data that an expert has found and they are explaining it, I think it's important to have it in your investigation, and you can present it without taking this side clearly.
Well, what do you think? Is this a topic that's here with us for a long time, or is this another trend? We had, issues of wages and debt and anger over inflation, but also over, what was that thing everyone in Europe was doing for 20 years called? Not spending any money.
Saving.
And now now everyone's on housing. We weren't on housing 5 years ago. Is this a topic that we need to stick with, or is it going to fizzle out? Do you think this is going somewhere?
I think it's going to be a long-term preoccupation, at least in European countries, maybe for years or even for decades, because there's not a solution in a short term. There is no immediate solution. If you need to build more houses, this will be a long process with a lot of also political consequences. So I think that this will be a problem for years.
I think this is something that the far right is speculating well, and I think as long as we don't address it, it's going to be one of their main talking points. So I think unless we take serious measures, we're going to live the consequences of it and see it discussed by the far right. Yeah.
Well, do you guys see any positive signs? Either people that are doing things differently, coming up with ideas that give you a hint that there is another way and that there might be some change coming?
No.
Seriously? Or maybe bad signs?
I mean, for me, the plan in Romania that he's proposing to give houses for 35,000, and people are signing up to this. And obviously, this is a great opportunity to get people's data. Is a relatively bad sign. Yeah.
What about the climate situation when you want to build a lot of houses and make them safe and live in big cities? Do you think that climate adds a different element to any of this?
Well, it happens now with the floods in Valencia. More of the houses were constructed in zones that they shouldn't be houses, and they were constructed during all the real estate boom in the 90s and beginning of the 21st century. And these houses, they shouldn't be constructed there, but they were. So there's a relationship between those people now can't still living in these zones that are dangerous zones, and in the future there may be more floods and other natural disasters that they have to move and go to another place, and there's going to be conflicts in that aspect, I think.
And maybe as a positive, in the recovery funds, so in the EU recovery and resilient funds, there were some provisions for social housing, for instance, for upgrading housing exactly for climate purposes. So maybe these are kind of more positive signs at the European level.
You brought up social housing. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that lots of European capitals had huge amounts of social housing. Some of them still do. There are still some types of housing available depending on the city and depending on the regulation. Could investing in social sustainable housing or making laws that make it mandatory to build such types of housing be a way?
Yes, but there have to be a political will of do that. And I don't know if there is in a lot of governments an interest of taking that kind of measures.
Well, we have seen some experiments, right? Berlin decided to limit the amount that you could raise the rent, with huge backlash from the real estate class that's still fighting against this regulation. Barcelona is also planning to change how many vacation rentals there can be or make it illegal. Will there be backlash to that, or do you think if it shows a success story, it could lead a way out for other countries?
This measure is a bit controversial because they say the mayor wants to eliminate all the Airbnbs just to give more strength to hotels, to the lobby, the hotel lobby. So it's really controversial. And I don't know if it's the solution. I mean, of course, there are 10,000 touristic apartments in Barcelona, and they want to delete them all in 4-year term, I think. This could help if we have more housing available, but still if the prices are not controlled, it wouldn't help that much. So I think it's not the only measure. It should be taken with the other measures that help the tenants. I mean, it should be, and also social housing could help, but I think just doing one big measure is not enough because it's a very complex market.
It seems like all of these cities are really under pressure from a lot of different financial interests that have maybe some sway that it's sometimes very invisible for us to see because of the fact that we still don't know who owns a lot of the housing in the places that we live. But that also makes it difficult for us to see which politicians are kind of influenced by this. But I do remember that there was a huge movement against evictions in Spain in the past, and where local community members would come out together. I mean, there was also big backlash from the government then with laws that would make it impossible to have certain kinds of protests. But should we be looking backwards, not forwards, for inspiration in how to fight for fair housing?
They still existing and they are still stopping evictions, but they didn't gain any relevant political influence. Well, except in the Barcelona council, that one of the activists of this movement then became the mayor of the city, Ada Colau.
Yes, but this was also a problem because this social movement was so strong. Then one of the leaders, Ada Colau, she was the mayor, and she caused also a big disappointment because she was the mayor and she couldn't do many things. So she tried, but she couldn't. And now she lost, she's not mayor anymore. So people was disappointed and the social movement was weakened. So in the end, 10 years later, people were like, okay, what was the point of all this? So it can also have a dark side.
I mean, we have a similar story from Romania, the time when there was a fire inside of a nightclub or a club where many people died, and it was bringing attention to the lack of infrastructure and the kinds of corruption that existed, and that also sparked a movement. Are there lasting repercussions of this for kind of social movements for better ways of life, better infrastructure?
Not at the moment, unfortunately. I mean, there was a big movement after the Collective fire, but I would say that corruption is still rampant in that sector. yeah, I can't say that there's been many positive signs in recent years. I thought so for a long time because this was combined. So the collective movement was combined with another climate change related movement before it. And so it was big social movements at the time, which led to the creation of two center-right parties or inspired it. But those kind of fizzled out or also turned out to be corrupt and had many issues. So at the moment, I wouldn't say that the outlook is positive for social movements.
Okay, I'll have one more shot to try to get a positive outcome here. I'm thinking about Poland. So it's not about housing, but we had this movement against the strict abortion bans in Poland for years, led by women. They were able to mobilize voters. They were able to fight despite extreme repression from the government over and over again. And now PIS is gone. Is this a story that shows how coming together, people can actually make change and put pressure on their governments?
Well,
it's my last shot to help me here.
Where should I start? Yeah, the thing is that women are really disappointed nowadays, Polish women, I mean. Because they actually, voted for the new government because they were convinced that the nearly abortion ban would be lifted. That's, finally they would win this fight. But as we can see, the law is still not changed. It's being blocked by one more conservative party within the coalition. And, for now, there is just this grassroots movements, this sisterhoods circle. Women are just taking care of each other. They're helping each other with abortion as they were doing for the past 8 years. So in that sense, nothing has changed because the law is not there, but the sisterhood and solidarity, is still there. So I don't know if it answers your questions. On political levels, nothing has changed yet, and we're really skeptical if this fight will be, won soon.
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, I think that there's a similar story in my country, which is that there was mass protest movements for the first Trump presidency. I think that many people didn't think this achieved very much, and that there's now this question of, like you said, sisterhood and taking care of each other, that maybe mutual aid and more looking very local to see what you can do. On the question of housing, where it has such international dimensions, it's hard to think of how mutual aid or really local solutions can help. But maybe this is somehow the through road.
Because also what we saw at the beginning of the Russian invasion, there was, no response from the Polish government. There were Polish people who are just inviting like complete strangers, for months. Ukrainians were just, sleeping over basically because there was nothing in place. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, solidarity does work, but, solidarity, especially in times of multiple crises, at a certain point, people get fed up. And this is what happened in Poland after a couple of months. People just also couldn't afford to host Ukrainian refugees, and the thing nowadays is in Poland, there is still no solution for that because apart from some horrendous places like temporary storage places actually for refugees, there's still no solution.
I wanted to add just one point to finish with something a little bit positive that we didn't mention, but in Spain, the tenants' unions are growing, and especially in Madrid and Barcelona, there are two big tenants' union, and they are doing many things. They are pushing the government to take measures on the topic of housing, and still what I said before, that it's not only about one measure. Multiple measures have to be taken, but they are there and they are having a bigger influence in government policies. So maybe on the long term, it will be very important to have these organizations, and I think people is getting aware of their existence and joining them. So maybe this is the positive side of this crisis.
I think that that's a good place for us to conclude today, is the fact that it took a long time for us to get into these complex situations, and it's not going to be one thing that gets us out of it, because that would be using the same magical thinking that we're warning against, right? There's not one cause for the problems we're in. Probably there won't be one single solution, but please.
I just wanted to add, because we were bringing up social housing and that this could maybe be a solution, but then I was thinking, okay, maybe it could backlash as well, because then you would have this narrative circulating that only like refugees are getting this, and like national citizens are are not entitled to this, and then the circle is round, because again you have this narratives that deepen the polarization.
She doesn't want to finish with good news.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so long as we're all in situations where we're constantly exposed to people that seem to be doing so much better than us, then I think that this bitterness, which is a big antidote to solidarity, can make things worse. But the fact that, I mean, there's 5 of us here, we're all from different countries. We all arrived at the conclusion that this is nonsensical to use xenophobia, racism, and simplistic mindsets to kind of solve these problems. And we are aware that there's a lot more things. There's more people like us out there. And if there's not, we can create them by reaching them with our journalism. So
positive note.
Yes, I hope that we all go and do that. And we've been finishing each of the sessions by saying thank you in lots of different languages. So I'll start. Dankeschön and thank you.
Dziękuję.
Gracias.
Mulțumesc.
Gracias.